Swaroop, let me start with you. Now, over the course of this series, we have understood how the marriage of technology and compliance can help enterprises in many sectors, spanning manufacturing to logistics to automotive companies. But when we talk of startups today, finance is often an overlooked function for them, which typically they start hiring talent for product, sales, and technology roles first as they establish their business and get processes in place. Now, tax compliances, they're generally outsourced to an external agency who can manage it up to a certain threshold of growth, which startups are known to hit fast. So how can startups drive 100% compliance with a lean team by using technology? I want you to set the context of what the thinking should be for startups when they think of compliance.
Sure. Thanks, Gautam. Maybe let me first take a step back and tell you what has happened, right? For some of the audience who have probably not seen our previous episodes. So what has happened in compliance is one space where actually the government is adopting technology at a much faster pace, right, as opposed to the rest of the ecosystem. In fact, they are a few steps ahead of like most enterprises, right? And this has led to like several things. There are three broad themes that we at Clear track, right, that we're seeing in compliance. So the first thing that we see is compliance and supply chain, right? They're traditionally seen as two isolated concepts, right? In the erstwhile era, all you needed to be compliant was, let's say, your tax auditor and your data, right? That is all you needed. But now what's happening is the reason supply chain is getting merged with compliance is because you also need your broader ecosystem to be compliant, right? There, your vendors, transporters, dealers, distributors, merchants, all of them also need to be compliant, and the onus of their compliance either directly hits you in, let's say, in terms of input tax credit, or indirectly hits you, right? Because let's say you're not able to acquire as many restaurants or drivers or merchants or whatever business startups are in, right? The second part of the piece that we are seeing is the amount of buffer that the government is giving is also coming down, right? They're becoming a lot more stringent, and rightly so, right? Because taxes is fundamentally government's revenue, right? It's there, for instance, revenue optimization. And what a lot of this does is they cut down on, let's say, a lot of tax avoidance that is in the system and makes the informal into the formal sector, right? Like, for example, the ITC claims, the buffer used to be 20%, and it slowly brought down to 10% and to 5%, and now it's almost 0%. There's no buffer anymore, right? There is the whole TDS 206 law that was implemented almost very quickly at almost a lightning speed, right? And they're also adopting a lot more technology, right? If you think about it, if you step back, there are a lot of systems that the government has. They've been adopting technology in silos, but now they're also adopting technology across the board and connecting each of the silos together, right? We've already seen that, for example, with e-invoicing and GST coming together, right? They're now thinking of connecting the whole FASTag system with the e-way bill NIC system, right? So they would actually know in real time whether your e-way bill was valid or not when you're, let's say, crossing certain borders. They're considering connecting the whole direct tax and the indirect tax system, right? So in terms of technology adoption, we're actually at the cusp. There is still a lot more way to go. And what these broad three themes mean is the government actually has a lot of data about you. Just like how a lot of startups here have a lot of data about their customers, the government also has a lot of data about these startups. And what this means is there's very little scope for error. And in the scope and in the context of startups, right, this is really painful, and even more painful than, let's say, a lot of established enterprises, right? For example, if you take a startup through the typical growth cycle, right? Let's say a seed, Series A level type of a round, to Series B, Series C, and then to an IPO, right? Their broad set of compliance needs scale very differently as opposed to another larger established enterprise where there are established processes. The business model doesn't change like let's say an HUL or a Tata Steel, etc. Right? It's far more evolving. Hence, the finance team has to be a lot more agile, right? As the business model changes, right? Because like in my erstwhile consulting era, we suggested a lot more business model changes to the enterprises, to the CEOs, right? And the CFOs have to be a very key enabler to make the finance or to be agile enough to be
Hmm.
compliant as the business model changes. For example, if I'm an e-commerce entity, right, it's not a very difficult decision to, let's say, move from an inventory model to a marketplace model, or vice versa, right? I was on a marketplace model to an inventory model, but the compliance in both these business models is very, very different, right? When you suddenly move to a marketplace model, you have a lot of merchants on board, and each of the merchants also have to now be compliant, right, as opposed to a very controlled environment like, for instance, an inventory model, right? Another piece would be the scale of invoices, right? As you scale, and your own merchants or restaurants or cab drivers, whatever, as they scale, some of them come under the ambit of e-invoicing, right? Now they have to be invoicing compliant. You also need to ensure your broader ecosystem is compliant, right? A lot of startups also consider creating ad hoc, because they don't think plan all of this far ahead. They would start with one provider, take a local chartered accountant and start with them, and then eventually, let's say, graduate to a big four, as opposed to thinking about it far ahead, right? Because they're always, as is the case with India, because the laws are still getting framed. A lot of startups in compliance, that at least personally I've seen, are a few steps behind
Hmm.
the government in adopting technology.